was realising today that a lot of what I'm talking about is quite antediluvian. I was in my late 20s. My background is I trained as an actor. I'd studied English and drama, and was working as an actor, intermittently working as an actor, stand-up comedian, and was trying to write a television drama. I wasn't exactly making a fortune. In fact, I was skint, very skint, living in Brixton, and it was on a day of particular penury that I bumped into a friend of mine who I'd known at university, who was working for an investigation agency. And he knew me from my university days as a university actor. We bumped into each other. I actually tried to run away from him because I was feeling so poor that I was embarrassed. He was looking really well-heeled and well-shod. Oh, that's both the same thing. And he was at the cash point machine. I thought, oh shit, it's Ian Barnett. And I was trying to run away, and he grabbed hold of me. He went, John! He was looking for somebody. He said, John, how are you? You know, you still acting? And I lied and said, yeah, as if I was kind of in Hollywood. And feeling like I just wanted to shrivel up. And he said, do you still do accents? And I said, yeah, of course I do. And he said, can you do a West African accent? And I said, yeah, of course I can, yeah. And in fact, I'd grown up with a few Nigerian guys at school, and I'd learnt a lot of West African patois. He dragged me to his office, gave me a phone, and I was, within half an hour, I was on the telephone to a bank in Switzerland, using a Nigerian accent to talk to a bank official to try and obtain the information about a Nigerian businessman and his bank details. And Switzerland, of course, is famous for its banking secrecy, but if you have the right amount of hubris or cheek, you ring them up, you have the confidence, and this is in 1995, which was a different world. It was beginner's luck, but I bluffed my way through and recovered a load of banking information, about several $million in a bank account in Switzerland. So that was the introduction to a business that was just had been growing since the late 70s, where it developed from a load of retired Scotland Yard people who had realised that there was a commercial value to information that could be blagged. The word blag comes from the French word to joke, and it's about blagging is about using a pretext to obtain information. So you're ringing into a bank, you pretend you are. It's about just inventing a way to obtain information. So it's about. I haven't got much time, so it's very difficult to concertina everything into a coherent message. So I'm trying to rush here. But the industry had grown up, and what it was doing was supplying information in the commercial sphere. And in the mid-90s, there was a big situation that had evolved between Virgin Atlantic, which was a new company in those days, and British Airways. And there was an industrial war that took place, and there was a Dirty Tricks campaign. The Sunday Times investigated that Dirty Tricks campaign, and they became aware of a firm of private investigators and they found out about some of their Dirty Tricks operations. And so, cutting a long story short, I happened to walk into this industry at the perfect time, where the Sunday Times suddenly became aware that they could get information. It was a shortcut to get information. And so I started getting tasked by the Sunday Times, who initially wrote a story about how private investigators could get information by ringing up banks, and they could also get information about people's health records. They did a story on health records, where we were given the names of about 8 people in important public roles, and we blagged their health information from their local doctors, which is really shocking and really unethical, but it was to illustrate how information wasn't safe. But the Sunday Times realised, in fact, that, and this goes back to what I've just been hearing about broadcast and everything, it's within what has changed everything and nothing, in the sense that
in the pre or analog days of 1995, pre-internet, pre-mobile phones virtually, it's drama and sensation that sells newspapers. The Sunday Times is a broadsheet, but it's very much, its oxygen is very much sensationalist. It was clearly realised that the information that could be blagged was of more use. It was of more use to go quietly about the way information was procured and procure information illegally and secure lots of stories than expose the way that information could be procured illegally, if you follow. So after a number of smaller stories, this is 1997, Tony Blair became elected as Prime Minister under the Labour government, and he followed a period of John Major's government, which was known for sleaze, and I'd done lots of, and again, this is all interesting because there's this idea of public interest, so you're exposing hypocrisy, and so it's a fudge, but it seemed exciting, and I would go home feeling that I was powerful and important because I was exposing hypocrisy. But at the same time, it's very, very hypocritical, and it's also very seductive to get involved in a situation where, going back to what we've just heard, where you can pay your mortgage very happily, and it's very easy, bit by bit, to be seduced into an organisation such as the Murdoch organisation, which is, in fact, I wear this because this is the Sunday Crimes, because it became a criminal organisation in terms of the way that my full-time life was involved researching politicians, government. I was involved in black operations, which included stealing the rubbish from outside the residences of cabinet ministers and other senior government people. The list of blagging, I haven't got time to go through the individual
Can I just make one quick question?
Please, yeah.
Because regardless of the ethics, which are obviously extremely questionable, you weren't following a story often, were you? You were fishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, fishing in the sense of just saying there's like going through Boris Johnson's dustbin to see whether you could find anything incriminating against him. You were just seeing what was there. You were not being told that this person was doing this, therefore perhaps one of the ways to get at them was that. Not that that's ethical, but it was that loose, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Well, Insight, the Sunday Times investigative team, it was set up by or made famous by Harold Evans and the thalidomide investigations in the 60s and 70s. In the 90s, it was under the editorship of David Leppard, who was extremely hungry for stories. And within a news, it's a boiler room. Whether you're working in television, whether you're working in print journalism, it's about sensation and headlines, and it's very easy to be seduced and inducted into an environment where you can convince yourself that what you're doing is acceptable. So it's a kind of pack mentality, and you're under a lot of pressure. So I was, the fishing. I mean, Tony Blair had a pollster who's now dead, but called Philip Gould, who was I suppose, a bit like a Dominic Cummings figure in that he was off stage. He wasn't frontline politics. He happened to live quite close to me. And so I was stealing his rubbish from outside his house and just going through his rubbish, which included his family's personal effects, which then was joked about because it ended up going into the so-called Insight Museum, his wife's brassiere and other kind of things. It was extremely unethical, and it's very, very, I just here to say it's very seductive. So cut to 15 years later, in about 2010, at the time of the publication of Tony Blair's memoir. This was the denouement to 15 years as a one-man crime wave. I was asked to... One of the things that the Sunday Times specialised in was
doing spoiler stories on books. So if a book is, like for example, Cameron's book that's just come out, if you could get an advance copy of the book before it was actually released, these are embargo titles, and you get an advance copy and you run a spoiler story. So that it's about controlling the news energy and showing who's more powerful. And the Sunday Times put a lot of resources into getting behind books, and there are a number of examples that I haven't got time to go into. But finally, I was persuaded to. It was a long, long story, and I really didn't want to do it. And by 2010, things were really, really hot. We had it was 2007 that Glenn Mulcair was arrested along with Clive Goodman at the News of the World. The News of the World, we'd moved closer to the Leveson inquiry. It was just before the Leveson inquiry, just before it was discovered that all the stuff about phone hacking and Millie Dowler. But Nick Davis, his book Flat Earth News, which I don't know if any of you have read, but I would write the title down, Flat Earth News by Nick Davis, because it's instrumental in the undoing of this. He was working for The Guardian, so he was tailing me, and so he was investigating me as this was all going on. Cutting a very long story short, I was arrested because I was finally caught trying to obtain a copy of this memoir, and I was taken to the police station. I was under an enormous amount of pressure, and concurrently, the information came out about, through Nick Davis and The Guardian, and his investigation into phone hacking. So it was suddenly revealed the extent to which thousands of people had their privacy and worlds hacked on an industrial scale by News International and also Mirror Group and the Mail. It was pretty much across the spectrum. And I was up on bail. It's very hard to compact all of this into such a short space of time.
That's what I'm going to do, John.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to press because I would like more time.
Sure.
But I wonder if Gio would come up and then because we've got about 5 minutes or so left.
Sure.
Whether we could have some questions for the.
Sure.
And if not, I'll ask.
Sure.
So if you move so you're near the microphone. Questions for Gio or John? I think you had a question for.
Yeah, it relates to the idea of public interest. It seems like most of kind of ethical grey areas are justified by, it's in the public interest, that's fine. And also, thanks very much for coming to talk to both of you. But for example, the can't pay, the take it away thing. If Channel 5 are justifying filming such a programme for public interest, but then show essentially poverty porn, is there are an organisation compelled to then display something in an informative way rather than clearly something that's just for entertainment? And I guess it also applies for if you're searching through rubbish, with an idea of selling papers, you then kind of manufacture public interest depending on what you find. I don't know, it just seems like you can manipulate the idea of public interest completely to what suits whatever you happen to film or find. Yeah. Is there an issue with that?
Well, I mean, poverty porn is an interesting thing, because I think viewers, the ratings for Can't Pay will take it away are huge. Really? I mean, so there is a public interest there, and they can justify that on the basis of the fact that, just look at viewing figures. If you want public interest, well, there you go. It's clearly, otherwise they wouldn't get recommissioned. I'll tell you now, if the ratings drop, the series will be dropped. That's been going for 10 series. So there is clearly a public interest in it. Like I said, I have issues with it because I just think, God, there for the grace of God go I. Like I'm only 1-2 paychecks away from being homeless myself. So and in many ways, it was a great education to me, just seeing what the flip side of that was and stuff. But I find it particularly upsetting when I was there filming when the family were being evicted and stuff. And many times, it sounds awful to say it, but again, I gave them the Citizens Advice Bureau number, I gave them 3, and I would go and say, look, put the camera down, and I'd go and try, because I'm kind of compassionate that way, because, but I did enough to justify going back to the office with footage. But at the same time, I'm not a complete twat. If you see what I mean. So it's kind of like, you've got to be be on that awareness and stuff. So.
Yeah, it's a great question and a difficult one to answer, but I know that this is interesting. It's a whole very interesting area of discussion of pre-Leveson, post-Leveson, Leveson 2, and other areas of press ethics. What we used to do was a litmus test based on, that's public interest. Ridiculous. And the Leveson inquiry's recommendations, which have largely been ignored because were, as I say, they've largely been ignored. So all you need to do is look at what's going on in the press at the moment. Look at the chaos that's gone on in the Sun this month in Gareth Thomas and what's his name, the New Zealand Stokes story. I mean, shocking, outrageous, unjustifiable. So newspapers and organisations are able to ignore. I think we have at the moment the situation is appalling. So it's about sure.
Sort of with in response to the response to the previous question, wouldn't you just recommend, if a journalist is sort of in a position where they have to pay bills and their choice is between doing something that can be quite hurtful and harmful to people in the sense of taking film, footage of them in their most vulnerable moments, the lowest points in their life, and just doing a non-journalism job, wouldn't you just recommend that we do something that is ethical and doesn't harm somebody, even if it doesn't pay as much or further our careers?
When we began, I mentioned this guy called Roger Cook. It's funny, who I was thinking, reminded that I'd be old enough to remember. And I live in Somerset, and I was in a cheese shop in Somerset about 10 years ago, and this man with a red face shuffled in, kind of fat, in a kind of, he looked really dishevelled, and it was Roger Cook. And clearly, he's a very successful man. He wasn't at peace with himself. I stepped out into this. My reason for doing this, it's very difficult living with your conscience. And as journalists, you do need to ask yourselves the question, well, okay, it pays the bills, but how am I going to feel about it? Let me assure you, if you do stuff, what you sow, you reap is the biblical quotation, and it's certainly true. It's living with a dirty conscience is not pleasant.
This is the karma position, which is...
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? What I feel is that you can make a difference. The reason why I became a journalist is not to become rich, because trust me, unless you're a presenter and stuff, and you do, you get loads of money that way doing the presenting route, you're not going to make much money in it. I became a journalist because I saw injustice. I ended up working with the same program that you did, World in Action. Now, World in Action for me was like being signed for Manchester United, because there was ethical. We had all these kind of debates that we're discussing today amongst ourselves, saying, for example, would you go into the bins of a paedophile that you know is a paedophile, that you know that's running around? And I said yes, and I've done that. I've been through the bins of a paedophile, and I could justify that in court, saying, you know what, that guy is out there committing offences, and I'll quite happily go to his bins and find out where the bugger is, because he's probably doing something again now. And I've got no qualms about that ethically, but we had that discussion. So what I'm saying to you is that you can make a difference. I've got people like Louise Woodward, the Shaky Baby case, because I did my documentary, the media picked up on it. And because of the media pressure and stuff, it became a story. Otherwise, she should have been locked away and sent to jail for the rest of her life. I feel proud of my journalism. And I feel privileged and blessed that I have done some of the stories that I've done. And I'm not going to, don't get me wrong, there's occasions where you go into, even with can't pay, won't pay, when I'm sticking a camera in someone's nose, I do it with compassion and I'm glad that I'm doing it rather than somebody else who doesn't give a toss. And that's the difference, I suppose, is that hopefully you being on this course, you will be that person. And when you see someone acting out of line, which I have done, I step back and say, you can't do that. And I'll tell that to the execs, I'll tell that to anyone. Because at the end of the day, I have to live with myself and my conscience. So what I'm saying to you is, it's like, that's why you go on these courses. That's why I was glad I came to City, because I know friends of mine who, they just do it because they know that it's an interesting job, and they'll sell the grandmother for a story. And I've worked with people next to me who've done that stuff, and they've got no qualms about it. But I question them about it and make them think about it, because sometimes it's easy not to think.
I think it's worth saying at this point that you can be a journalist and be ethical.
Exactly.
What we're doing today is giving you a sense of what happens on the dark side or the possibilities of the problems that you may face. But, you do come up against ethical questions. But most news organisations do tend to operate ethically most of the time. So there's a controversy.
I think within, as quick as possible, but I think there's a lot of psychopathy within news organisations, and there's a lot of pressure from executives, and it is important to have the confidence to stand up and say no,
Exactly.
and unionisation and actually standing up and reporting, saying no, it's your own conscience. I didn't say no. I said yes, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, so I'm afraid we're about to go.